Young men are learning this too late, and it's costing them everything. Let me tell you something nobody in your life has had the guts to say out loud. You were set up, not by some shadowy conspiracy, not by bad luck, not by laziness or bad choices or the wrong attitude. You were set up by the people who loved you the most. Your parents, your teachers, every adult who sat you down and explained how the world works. They handed you a map. They handed it to you with full confidence and full love, and the map was wrong. Here is the part that actually stings. They did not lie to you on purpose. They gave you the only map they had. The one their parents gave them. The one that got passed down through generations like a piece of furniture nobody questioned because it had always been in the house. And right now, in 2026, you are out here navigating real roads with that outdated map, making real decisions with real consequences, and wondering why you keep ending up somewhere you did not intend to go. This video is not going to comfort you. It is not going to tell you to journal more, or find your inner peace, or trust the process. What it is going to do is pull back the curtain on exactly what was missing from your education. Not the school curriculum, the real education, the one that should have happened at the kitchen table, on long drives, during the conversations that never quite happened. The stuff your father did not know to teach you, because nobody taught him either. And we are going to be specific. We are going to be honest, and by the time this video is done, you are going to understand not just what was missing, but exactly why it was missing, and what it has already cost you without you even realizing it. Let's start with something that sounds almost too simple. Nobody taught you the difference between being useful and being valuable. Those two words sound similar. They are not even close to the same thing. Useful means someone needs you right now for a specific task. You answer the call. You fix the problem. You show up, you deliver, and the moment the task is done, your usefulness is done with it. Valuable means people cannot afford to lose you. Valuable means your absence creates a problem that cannot easily be solved. Useful gets used. Valuable gets respected. And the entire structure of how you were raised, from school to home to every social environment you moved through, was built around producing useful people. Not powerful ones, not valuable ones, useful ones. Think about every single piece of praise you got as a child. What was it actually for? Sit still. Follow the instructions. Complete the task the way you were told to complete it. Don't talk back. Share with others. Be the good one. Be the reliable one. Be the one everyone can count on. Every gold star you ever received was for compliance. Not for thinking. Not for questioning. Not for deciding the instructions were wrong and doing it better. For compliance. And here is the fact that reframes all of it. The modern school system was not designed to educate you in the way you probably think education means. It was designed during the Industrial Revolution to produce factory workers. That is not a conspiracy theory. That is documented history. Prussian educator Johann Gottlieb Fichte laid out the blueprint in the early 1800s, and the goal was explicit. Create obedient, punctual, rule-following people who would fit neatly into an industrial economy. Show up on time. Follow orders. Do not question the system. Be useful. John Taylor Gatto was a New York City schoolteacher for 30 years. Won Teacher of the Year multiple times. Then resigned publicly by writing an op-ed in the Wall Street Journal where he explained that he could no longer in good conscience participate in a system designed not to develop minds but to manage them. He described what school actually teaches underneath the official curriculum. Stay in the class you are assigned to. Suppress your own judgment and follow instructions. Accept that your place in the hierarchy is not up for negotiation. You were not educated, you were processed, and the product of that processing is a person who is excellent at being useful and completely unprepared for what it actually takes to be respected. Now here is where it gets specific to young men in a way that no adult in your life had a framework to prepare you for. You grew up online, which means you grew up with something no previous generation ever had to navigate. Constant, real-time, numerical feedback on your worth as a person. Every photo, every post, every thought you put out into the world, it got an immediate response. A number, a count. And without anyone sitting you down and explaining what was actually happening inside your brain when you got those numbers, your psychology started doing something that took researchers years to fully understand. It started treating external validation like a survival need. A study out of UCLA found that when teenagers saw their photos getting a high number of likes, the reward circuitry in their brains lit up in exactly the same way it does when someone eats chocolate or wins money. The same circuitry, and when the likes were low, the stress response activated. Your nervous system was responding to social media feedback the same way your ancestors' nervous systems responded to being accepted or rejected by their tribe. Because back then, tribal rejection meant death. Your brain never got the update that a low like count is not the same as being left behind to starve. Sean Parker, the first president of Facebook, said in a 2017 interview that they built the platform by intentionally exploiting this vulnerability. They asked themselves, how do we consume as much of your time and conscious attention as possible? The answer was a social validation feedback loop, and he admitted they knew what they were doing to young brains. They did it anyway. So you grew up in an environment that was deliberately engineered to make external approval feel like oxygen, to make you feel like your value as a person was something other people got to vote on. And then the adults around you, who grew up before any of this existed, handed you advice built for a world where none of that pressure was part of daily life. That is the gap. That is the specific, measurable, real distance between what you were handed and what you actually needed. And before we go any further, if this is already landing, if you are already feeling that quiet recognition like someone is finally saying the thing out loud, I need you to subscribe right now. Not for the numbers. Because what this channel does, every single video, is have the conversation that should have happened years ago. The one your father should have sat you down for. The one nobody around you knew how to have. And you do not want to miss what comes next. Subscribed? Good. Let's keep going. Here is something your father understood about the world that actually worked for a long time. Work hard, be reliable, show up, keep your word, put your head down, and the system will reward you. And for the generation that rebuilt economies after world wars, that manual delivered. You kept your head down, you put in the decades, and the social contract held up. Job security. Pension, house, respect from your community. The deal was real. Then the world changed. Not slowly, fast, faster than any generation before yours had ever experienced change. The jobs your grandfather built his identity around started disappearing. The companies that promised loyalty to employees quietly decided loyalty was no longer part of the business model. A 2023 Gallup study found that only 23% of employees worldwide feel genuinely engaged at work. 23%. That means the vast majority of people, most of them young, are doing exactly what they were told to do, following the script they were handed and feeling nothing from it. Not fulfilled, not seen, not valued, just useful, just a function, just something the machine needs until it finds something cheaper. The manual got passed down. The world it was written for did not come with it. And here is what that costs you in ways that go beyond a job you do not love or a career that does not feel right. It costs you your sense of self-worth when that system does not reward you the way you were told it would. Because if your whole identity is built on being useful, on being reliable, on being the one everyone can count on, and then the system shrugs and moves on anyway, you have nothing underneath to stand on, no foundation that belongs to you independent of what you produce for other people. That is not a motivation problem. That is a structural problem, and it is one your father could not have predicted because when he was your age, the structure was still holding. Now I want to go deeper into something that almost nobody is talking about honestly in this space. And it connects to why the gap between young men today and every generation before them is not just a matter of degree, it is a matter of kind. This is a fundamentally different challenge. Young men today are the first generation to grow up with their social life documented in real time from childhood. Think about what that actually means. When your father was 13 and got it wrong, got rejected, embarrassed himself, made a bad call, that moment lived in the memories of maybe 15 people who were there. It faded. It became a story. Eventually it became nothing. When you were 13 and got it wrong, it potentially lived on a screen, shared, screenshotted, commented on, available indefinitely. Psychologist John Twenge has been studying generational differences for over 25 years. Her research found that the rise of smartphones and social media directly correlates with a dramatic increase in anxiety, depression, and feelings of loneliness among teenagers. The brief version of what she found is this. The device in your pocket changed the psychological landscape of adolescence in ways we are still only beginning to understand, and nobody handed you a guide for that. Nobody taught you how to protect your internal sense of self-worth from a machine that was specifically designed to make you question it. So let's talk about what that protection actually looks like. Because this is where we move from the problem to the first layer of what was missing from your education. Your dad's version of self-worth was transactional. You did good work, you got respect, you provided for your family, you kept your word, and the community reflected that back to you. His self-worth was earned through action and confirmed by his immediate environment. It was external, but it was also slow-moving and relatively stable. The feedback loop was long. You did not find out in real time whether your community approved of you. Your version of self-worth, the one you were handed without instruction, is living in a feedback loop that never closes. It is instant. It is constant. It is numerical. And because nobody taught you that the number is not the truth, you absorbed the number as information about your actual worth as a person. That is not your fault. That is what happens when you are handed a machine without a manual. Here is the thing about self-worth that the old manual got partly right and mostly incomplete. It is not something you earn from other people. It is not something you build by being useful enough for long enough. It is not a reward the world gives you when you have finally done enough of the right things. It is something you construct internally, from the inside out, and it requires a specific kind of raw material that your generation was never given in adequate supply. That raw material is solitude, not loneliness. These are not the same thing, and the difference matters more than almost anything else in this conversation. Loneliness is when you are alone, and it hurts. It is the experience of being without connection when you need connection. Loneliness is painful because it is supposed to be. It is your system telling you that you need people. That signal is real, and it is important. Solitude is something completely different. Solitude is when you are alone, and you are okay. More than okay. Solitude is when you can sit with yourself, with your own thoughts, with the silence, and you are not looking for the exit. You are not reaching for the phone. You are not performing for an audience that is not there. You are just with yourself. And in that space, something starts to happen that cannot happen any other way. You start to find out who you actually are underneath the performance. And this is where your father's generation had an enormous advantage over yours that nobody talks about. Not because they were wiser or stronger or better equipped, simply because the technology that makes solitude nearly impossible did not exist yet. They had boring afternoons. They had long drives with nothing to look at. They had evenings with no screens, where the only option was to sit with their own mind. And in all of that enforced quiet, they were accidentally developing something you have to develop intentionally: the ability to be alone without it feeling like a crisis. Research from the University of Virginia found that participants left alone in a room for 15 minutes with nothing to do chose to press a button that gave them a mild electric shock rather than sit quietly with their own thoughts. 67% of men made that choice. They chose physical pain over 15 minutes of mental quiet. The point is this: solitude is not a nice to have. It is not a wellness trend or a luxury. It is the foundational practice that makes every other thing in this video possible. You cannot build real self-worth without it. You cannot develop genuine confidence without it. You cannot figure out what you actually want, separate from what the algorithm keeps showing you that you should want, without it. And nobody taught you that, because nobody around you had to learn it intentionally. They just had it by default. So the first thing that was missing from your education is the most basic and the most important: the understanding that who you are is not the same as how you perform, and that the work of closing the gap between those two things is not selfish or antisocial or navel-gazing. It is survival. It is the foundation everything else has to be built on. Now let's talk about relationships, because this is where the old manual fails you in the most visible and the most painful way. Your father was taught a model of relationships that was built around roles. You provide. You protect. You show up. You are the reliable one. The strong one. The one who handles it. Emotion was largely off the table not because your father was broken, but because the model he was handed did not have a category for it. Men of his era were taught that feelings were private at best and weakness at worst. You handled your inner world alone, and you showed the outer world competence and stability. That model had a logic to it for the world it was built for. In a world where your value to your family and community was almost entirely functional, keeping your emotional world separate made a certain kind of sense. You could not afford to be visibly undone. There was too much depending on your competence. But here is what that model did not account for. Human beings are not primarily functional creatures. We are relational creatures. And the research on this is not ambiguous. The Harvard study of adult development, the longest-running study on human happiness ever conducted, followed people for over 80 years. The headline finding was this: the quality of your close relationships is the single greatest predictor of how healthy and happy you are going to be. Not your income, not your career, not your status or your achievements or how hard you worked. The quality of your close relationships. Your dad's generation got pieces of this right by accident. Community was enforced by circumstance. You lived near your family. You went to the same church or the same club for decades. Your neighbor was also your friend. Relationships had depth partly because geography made depth unavoidable. You could not ghost someone you were going to see at the hardware store on Saturday. Your world does not work that way. You can maintain the appearance of a rich social life while being profoundly disconnected from every person in it. You can have hundreds of people who consider you a friend and nobody who actually knows you. And the 2021 Harvard survey that found 61% of young adults between 18 and 25 reporting serious loneliness is not a coincidence. That is the predictable result of a relational model that was never updated for the world you are actually living in. What your father should have taught you about relationships, what the curriculum completely skipped, is this: real connection requires vulnerability, not the performed vulnerability you see in social media confessionals where someone shares something personal to get engagement. Actual vulnerability, the kind that happens in private, without an audience, with someone who has earned your trust through consistent behavior over time. That is terrifying for a generation that grew up performing. Because when the performance is all you know, dropping it feels like losing your protection. It feels like exposure. And in a world where exposure has historically led to screenshots and public humiliation, the instinct to keep the performance going even in your most private relationships is completely understandable. It is also slowly killing your ability to have the one thing the 80-year Harvard study says matters more than anything else. So what was missing from your education on relationships? The understanding that being known, actually known, not followed, not liked, not admired, but known, is not a vulnerability. It is a strength. And it requires you to get comfortable with the terrifying possibility that someone might see who you actually are and still stay. That possibility is not a risk. That possibility is the whole point. Now let's talk about something that connects the relationship piece to the identity piece and explains something you have probably already noticed in your own life but maybe have not had language for yet. You are aware, on some level, of the gap between who you are online and who you are in private. Most people your age are. Psychologists call it the online-offline identity gap, and the wider that gap is, the worse your mental health outcomes tend to be. Not because authenticity is some moral virtue you are failing to uphold, because carrying two versions of yourself is exhausting, and because the version of you that exists online cannot sustain you. It can attract followers, but it cannot give you a sense of self that holds when things get hard. And things always get hard. Here is something that gets almost no attention in conversations about young men and mental health. The highlight reel effect. You already know what this is intuitively. You see everyone's best moments, their wins, their relationships looking effortless, their bodies at their best. And even when you know intellectually that what you are seeing is curated, your brain does not process it that way. Your brain compares your interior experience to their exterior presentation. And your interior experience loses every single time. Social comparison is not new. Psychologist Leon Festinger described social comparison theory back in 1954. He found that humans have a natural drive to evaluate themselves by comparing themselves to others. What is new is the scale. The speed, the fact that you are doing it hundreds of times a day instead of occasionally, and the fact that the people you are comparing yourself to are not your actual peers, but a curated global highlight reel of the most presentable moments of millions of people you will never meet. Your father compared himself to his neighbors and his colleagues, and maybe a handful of people in a magazine once a month. You compare yourself to the entire world before breakfast. That is not a character flaw. That is a structural disadvantage that nobody handed you the tools to deal with. And the tool, the actual practical thing that changes this, is what psychologists call comparative immunity, the practice of making your primary reference point internal rather than external. Measuring yourself against who you were yesterday rather than against who someone else is presenting themselves to be today. It is one of the most researched and most effective interventions for anxiety and self-worth in young adults. And it requires the one thing that is hardest in a world built for external validation. It requires you to decide that your own honest assessment of your progress is the only one that actually counts. Now let's talk about respect, not the concept, the actual mechanics of how it works in real life, between real people in real situations. Because there is a version of respect that was sold to young men that is almost completely backwards. And the cost of operating on that backwards version shows up every single day. Here is the version you were sold. Be good to people, and they will be good to you. Show up for others, and they will show up for you. Give your loyalty freely, and it will be returned. Be the reliable one, and the people around you will respect and value you for it. That version sounds right. It sounds moral and fair, and like the kind of thing a decent person should believe. It is also one of the most expensive misunderstandings a young person can carry into adult life. Psychologist Robert Cialdini spent decades studying the science of influence, and his research kept returning to one finding. People assign value based on perceived scarcity, not based on how much effort someone puts in or how reliably they show up. The person who is always available, always helpful, always ready to drop everything, does not read as valuable to the human brain. They read as abundant. And what is not scarce is not treated as precious. Your father understood a version of this intuitively. He probably told you at some point that people treat you the way you let them treat you. That is the folk version of what the research actually confirms. How you present yourself, the signals you send about your own value through your behavior, trains the people around you in how to regard you. Not in a manipulative way, in the same natural way that every social organism learns from its environment. You are always teaching the people in your life how to treat you. The question is whether you are doing it consciously or by accident. Most people your age are doing it by accident, and the lessons they are accidentally teaching are expensive ones. The first signal that generates genuine respect is boundaries, and I do not mean the word in the way it gets used on social media as a synonym for doing whatever you want. I mean the actual thing. The clear, consistent behavioral demonstration that your time, your energy, and your attention have a price, not a monetary price, a behavioral one. That access to you requires something in return. Effort, reciprocity, basic respect for the things you have said matter to you. A study published in the Journal of Personality and Social Psychology found that people who express their preferences clearly and hold to them, even in the face of social pressure, are consistently rated as more likable and more trustworthy than people who accommodate and agree, not less likable. More, because we are wired to trust people who have a stable internal position more than we trust people who shift to match whatever the room seems to want. The second signal is what I am going to call earned mystery, and this one runs directly counter to everything the algorithm has been training young men to do. The algorithm rewards disclosure, share more, be more open, give people access to your thoughts, your feelings, your daily life, your opinions on everything. And in the process, it strips you of one of the most powerful social assets a person can have. Mystery. Mystery is not about being secretive or playing games. Mystery is the natural byproduct of having a rich interior life that you do not feel compelled to broadcast. It is what happens when you are genuinely comfortable with yourself and genuinely unbothered by whether other people have full access to your inner world. Think about the people in your life who carry real weight, real presence. Almost universally, those people share one quality. They are not performing. They are not telling you everything they think the moment they think it. They are present, observant, economical with what they give away. And that quality is magnetic in a way that no amount of disclosure can replicate. The third signal is composure, the ability to remain calm when everything around you is not calm. The ability to think clearly when other people are reacting emotionally. The ability to stay in your own lane when the situation is designed to pull you out of it. Neuroscientist Antonio Damasio's research found that the ability to regulate emotional response is directly linked to quality of decision-making. People who struggle to regulate emotional responses make measurably worse decisions under pressure. People who have developed genuine emotional regulation make clearer, more strategic decisions in exactly the situations where decisions matter most. Composure is not a personality trait you either have or do not have. It is a practice. It is something you develop through repetition, through intentionally choosing your response in situations where your default would be to react, through building the gap between stimulus and response, one small choice at a time, until that gap becomes wide enough to actually think inside. Viktor Frankl, who survived Nazi concentration camps and went on to found an entire school of psychotherapy, put it this way: between stimulus and response there is a space. In that space is our power to choose our response. In our response lies our growth and our freedom. That space between what happens to you and what you do about it is where your entire character lives. And expanding that space is the work. Now let's talk about something that is almost never discussed honestly in conversations aimed at young men. The relationship between how you spend your time and what you actually become. Not productivity. Not morning routines. The deeper thing. The reality that time is not just a resource you manage, it is a material you are made of. What you spend your hours doing is quite literally what you are building yourself into, not metaphorically. Neurologically, the brain builds itself around what it repeatedly does. You are physically constructing your brain with your habits. Young men today have more freedom over your hours than any previous generation. More options, more access, more ability to choose how you spend the raw material of your life. And that freedom, which sounds like an advantage, is also one of the most under-acknowledged challenges of your specific moment, because freedom without direction is just noise. And the algorithm, which is now the primary organizing force for how most young people spend their discretionary time, does not care about what you are becoming. It cares about what you are watching. And the two things are not the same. A 2022 study found that the average person touches their phone over 2,600 times a day. Every one of those touches is a small withdrawal from your attention, which is both your most finite resource and the literal substance of your experience of being alive. So here is the question that was never on any test you took in school, but is possibly the most important question you will ever sit with. What am I pointing my attention at? And is it building me into someone I respect? Not someone other people respect. Someone you respect. The Harvard psychiatrist George Vaillant, who led the adult development study for decades, said that the people in his research who spent their lives seeking external achievement and approval, even the ones who achieved significant levels of both, consistently reported feeling like something was missing. Like they were always preparing for the life they were going to live, rather than actually living it. The people who reported the highest levels of well-being, consistently across decades, were the ones who had shifted their primary orientation from external to internal, from what the world thinks of me to what I think of myself, and am I living in alignment with that? That shift does not happen automatically. It is a deliberate choice that has to be made, usually more than once, against the very strong current of every social force pushing you back toward external orientation. Your father never fully made that shift, most likely, because the world he lived in did not have the vocabulary for it, and the structures around him kept reinforcing the external orientation. Work harder, earn more, build a bigger life. The implicit promise was always that the external thing would eventually feel like enough. It does not. It never has. Psychologist Martin Seligman's work on well-being found that after basic needs are met, additional external success has a rapidly diminishing return on actual happiness. What keeps compounding in terms of genuine well-being is meaning, engagement, relationship quality, and the sense that you are the author of your own life, rather than a character in someone else's story. You are the first generation of men to have all of that research accessible to you before you have spent 40 years learning it the hard way. That is not a small thing. That is a significant advantage if you use it. Now let's talk about something that sits at the intersection of identity, respect, relationships, and the use of your time. The question of what a man is actually for. The old answer was functional. A man provides. A man protects. A man builds. A man endures. And underneath all of that, a man does not need. He does not need comfort or validation or support. He is a closed system. Self-sufficient, by definition. The measure of his success is how much he can carry without showing the weight. That model produced some genuinely remarkable things. It built infrastructure and endured hardship and created stability for families and communities across generations. The functional man, the provider, the one who shoulders it and keeps going, that archetype has real dignity in it. It also produced staggering rates of isolation, addiction, early death, and relationship breakdown in the men who lived by it. The American Psychological Association published findings showing that men who rigidly adhere to traditional masculine norms have significantly higher rates of depression, significantly lower rates of seeking help, and die on average 5 years earlier than men who maintain genuine social connection and emotional literacy. 5 years. Not from weakness, from the accumulated physiological cost of carrying everything alone with no outlet and no support. So what does strength actually look like in the world you are living in? Real strength in 2026 looks like this. The ability to be completely, genuinely honest with yourself about where you are and what you need, without either performing distress or suppressing it. The ability to pursue your own direction with full commitment, without needing external permission or validation to sustain that commitment. The ability to be in genuine relationship with other people, not transactional relationship, but the kind where you are actually known and you actually know them. The ability to fail, and fail visibly, and not let it rewrite your fundamental assessment of your own worth. The ability to hold discomfort without immediately reaching for the nearest exit. None of those things are easy. All of them can be developed. None of them fit neatly into a social media post. All of them compound over time into something that is qualitatively different from anything the external world can give you. That is the version of strength your father should have handed you. The version that was missing from the manual. Not because he was not a good man. Because nobody had given it to him in language he could pass on. Now let's talk about something practical. The single most impactful practice for closing the gap between what you were taught and what you actually need is something so unglamorous that almost nobody talks about it seriously. It is the daily practice of honest self-assessment. Not journaling in the sense of processing your feelings onto a page, although that has real value. The specific practice of sitting down, ideally the same time every day, and asking yourself 3 questions with ruthless honesty. Where am I actually? Not where my Instagram makes it look like I am. Not where I wish I was. Where am I, right now, in the areas of my life that actually matter? Relationships. Physical health. The work I am doing, and whether it is moving me in a direction that means something to me. My own integrity, meaning the gap between what I say I value and how I actually behave. Second question, what am I avoiding? Because there is always something. A conversation you are not having. A habit you are not addressing. A decision you are putting off. Naming it specifically removes some of its power over you. The things we avoid grow in the dark. They shrink when we look directly at them. Third question. What is one thing I can do today that is in the direction I actually want to go? Not a massive overhaul, not a complete reinvention, one thing. Something concrete. Something that when you do it, your honest self-assessment tomorrow can say, yes, I moved. That practice, done consistently, builds something that no amount of content consumption can build. It builds the sense, grounded in actual evidence from your own life, that you are someone who does what they say they are going to do. That you can trust yourself. Now let me paint you a picture. There are 2 guys. Same age. Same starting point. Same generation of young men. Same incomplete manual handed down from the same kind of father who did his best with what he had. They both watched the same content. They both felt the same gap. They both had the moment of recognition, that quiet realization that something important was missing from everything they were taught. The difference is what they did after that moment. The first guy felt it, nodded along, maybe shared the video, maybe dropped a comment, and then went back to exactly what he was doing before. Not because he did not care, because the gap between feeling something and changing something is wider than almost anyone admits. And because the world he lives in is extraordinarily good at absorbing moments of clarity and dissolving them back into the noise before they can become anything permanent. The second guy did something different. Not dramatic, not a public announcement, not a complete personality overhaul that he documented in a 30-part series. Something quieter. He took one thing from what he heard, and he actually did it. Then he did it again. Then it became the floor he stood on while he reached for the next thing. And over months, not years, over a surprisingly short window of time, when the practice is genuine, he became someone his previous self would not quite recognize. Same starting point. Same gap. Completely different life. This is not a motivational story. This is the literal mechanism of how change works and why most men never experience it despite being surrounded by more information about personal development than any generation in history. The information was never the missing piece. The doing was always the missing piece. The real version of change looks like this. It is uncomfortable for longer than you expect, not dramatically uncomfortable, not crisis-level uncomfortable, just the low-grade, persistent discomfort of doing something differently than you have always done it while every habit and reflex you have built over years pulls you back toward the familiar. That pull is not weakness. That is just how brains work. Neural pathways that have been reinforced over thousands of repetitions do not dissolve because you decided to do something different. They fade gradually, through consistent redirection, over time. It is slower than the content makes it look. The guy on your feed who looks completely transformed? That transformation, if it is real, happened over years of unglamorous daily work that nobody filmed. What you see is the highlight reel of the outcome. What you do not see is the hundreds of mornings he did the thing when he did not feel like it, the long stretches where nothing seemed to be changing, and he kept going anyway. It requires you to get comfortable being a beginner. And this one is specifically hard for your generation because you grew up in a world where everything you put out into the public space got evaluated immediately. The fear of being seen not knowing something, the fear of trying something publicly and failing publicly. These fears are understandable products of growing up under constant social surveillance. They are also some of the most limiting forces in your life because everything worth having requires a period of being genuinely bad at it before you can be good at it. Psychologist Carol Dweck spent decades studying the difference between people who develop capability over time and people who stagnate. The single biggest differentiator was not intelligence or talent or opportunity. It was whether the person believed their abilities were fixed or developable. People who believe they can develop get better. People who believe their abilities are fixed stop trying when things get hard. And the belief itself is the variable, not the underlying capability. The current version of you is not the final version. The current version is just where you are starting from. Now let me tell you what the man on the other side of this work actually looks like in practice. Not the fantasy version, the real one. He is not fearless. The idea that the goal is to become someone who does not feel fear is not the goal. And it is not real. What changes is not the presence of those feelings. What changes is the relationship to them. He feels the fear and has developed enough self-knowledge to recognize it as information rather than instruction. He has learned, through repetition, that uncomfortable feelings are not emergencies. They are weather. They pass. And you can keep moving through weather. He knows what he actually wants, not what the algorithm keeps suggesting he should want. He has spent enough time in honest self-reflection to have a genuine sense of his own values, his own direction, his own definition of a life well lived. And that clarity functions as a compass that makes decisions simpler, not easy. Simpler, because when you know what you are building toward, you are always asking, does this move me toward the thing or away from it? That question cuts through an enormous amount of noise. He has learned to distinguish between the people who add to his life and the people who subtract from it, and he has made peace, genuinely, with the reality that some relationships are not fixable and some situations require you to simply leave rather than trying harder. This sounds obvious. It is one of the hardest things most people ever actually do, because we are wired for attachment. And learning to tell the difference between persistence that is worth it and fear of loss dressed up as loyalty is one of the most sophisticated pieces of emotional intelligence you can develop. He handles conflict, not perfectly, not without discomfort, but directly and honestly, and with the actual goal of resolution rather than the performance of being right. He has learned that the conversation he keeps avoiding does not get easier by avoiding it. It gets heavier, and the ability to stay in difficulty without shutting down or blowing up is one of the most powerful things you can offer in any relationship, personal or professional. He is not constantly available. And this is not a strategy. It is the natural byproduct of having a life that actually matters to him. When your time is genuinely occupied with things that mean something to you, you are naturally less available to things and people that do not serve those things. The scarcity is real, not manufactured, and real scarcity communicates itself without effort. He has a relationship with solitude that is comfortable and regular, not because he has become antisocial, because he has discovered, through practice, that the quiet is where his best thinking happens, where he processes what he actually feels versus what he thought he felt, where he makes the decisions that matter rather than the ones the moment is pressuring him into. He has stopped performing. This is the deepest one and the hardest to describe, but you will recognize it when you feel it in yourself. The performance is exhausting. Maintaining two versions of yourself takes a constant expenditure of energy that you cannot even fully account for, because it has been running so long it feels normal. The man on the other side of this work has closed that gap to a degree that makes his daily experience qualitatively different. He is largely the same person in every room he walks into. And that consistency generates a kind of ease and confidence that cannot be faked and cannot be accessed any other way. He takes full responsibility for where he is, not in a self-punishing way, in the clean, clear, practical way of someone who has accepted that blaming the system or the circumstances or the people who did not teach him what he needed to know is an explanation but not a strategy. Yes, the gap was real. Yes, the map was wrong. And none of it moves him forward. What moves him forward is the daily practice of asking not what was done to me, but what am I going to do now? Now I want to talk about something that nobody in this space talks about honestly enough. The social cost of becoming this person. Because there is one. And pretending there is not does you a disservice. When you start changing, genuinely changing, some of the people around you are not going to like it. Not because they are bad people. Because you changing disrupts the system they were operating in. The version of you that was always available, always accommodating, always willing to bend and make it easier for everyone else, that version served functions in the lives of the people around you. And when that version starts to shift, when you start saying no to things you used to say yes to automatically, when you start requiring reciprocity instead of just giving indefinitely, some people will experience that as you becoming worse, colder, more selfish, different in a way that feels like a loss. Let them feel that. Not cruelly, not with a speech about how you are evolving, just quietly, without drama. Let them feel it. Because here is what that reaction is actually telling you. It is telling you that those particular people were primarily relating to you through the functions you served for them, rather than through genuine connection with who you actually are. The relationships that have roots survive your growth. The people who actually care about you adjust. They might push back initially, but they stay. And often, with time, the dynamic between you and those people improves, because you are now showing up as someone with a genuine self rather than an endlessly accommodating surface. The relationships that only had function tend to fade. And yes, that is a loss. Even when it is the right thing, it is still a loss. A young man's relationship with loss is complicated by the fact that nothing fully ends online. People do not disappear. They just become a profile you no longer interact with, but can always see. The closure that previous generations got through physical distance and time, you often do not get. The framework for handling that, in brief, is this. Closure is not something the other person gives you. It is something you construct internally by making peace with the fact that the relationship served its purpose. That purpose is complete. And that holding on to what it was prevents you from being fully present for what is coming. You do not need their acknowledgement to close something in yourself. You just need to decide that it is closed and then behave consistently with that decision until the feeling catches up. The feeling will catch up, it always does. Behavior leads and emotion follows, not the other way around. Now let's talk about where you actually start, because everything we have covered in this video could easily become another thing you consumed that felt meaningful and then dissolved back into the noise, and I do not want that for you. You start with one honest conversation with yourself. Not a list of goals, not a vision board, not a 5-year plan. One honest conversation where you ask yourself, with as much honesty as you can access right now, what is the thing I most consistently avoid looking at directly in my own life? What is the area where the gap between how I present and how I actually am is widest? What is the thing I already know I need to change that I have been successfully not thinking about? Whatever came to mind just now when you read those questions. That is your starting point, not someone else's, not the thing this video suggested you should work on. The specific thing your own honest self already knows about. That thing. And the next step is not a plan. The next step is a conversation. Either with yourself, in writing, with genuine honesty, or with someone you trust enough to be real with, not a performance of vulnerability. A real one, where you say the actual thing instead of the version of the thing that makes you look okay. That conversation is the beginning of the shift from consuming to doing. From knowing to becoming. From the man who recognized the gap to the man who is actively, specifically, unglamorously closing it. Here is something I want to leave you with that I think is the most honest thing I can say across everything in this video. The fact that your father did not give you the full manual is not the most important thing about your situation. The most important thing is that you are here, right now, at an age where the choices you make about who you are going to be are still completely open. Nothing is fixed. Nothing is permanent. The neural pathways you have built can be redirected. The habits that are costing you can be replaced. The relationships that are draining you can be evaluated and addressed. The version of yourself that you have been performing can gradually give way to the one that is actually underneath it. You are not behind. You are just starting from a different place than you expected, and starting from a different place than you expected is not a disadvantage. It is just the truth of your specific starting point, and the only thing that matters about your starting point is whether you are honest about where it is and whether you are willing to move from it. The 80-year Harvard study told us that the quality of your relationships is the greatest predictor of a good life. The research on self-worth told us that it has to be built from the inside out. The neuroscience of habit told us that you are literally constructing your brain with your daily choices. Frankl told us that the last freedom is always the choice of your response. And every piece of evidence we looked at, across decades of research by people who spent their careers trying to understand what actually makes a human life go well, pointed to the same fundamental truth. The life you want is built in private, in the unglamorous daily practice of choosing deliberately, in the conversations you have honestly, in the commitments you keep when nobody is watching, in the moments where the old pattern pulls at you, and you choose the new one anyway. In the solitude where you actually hear yourself. In the relationships where you let yourself be known. In the conflicts you do not avoid. In the standards you hold even when holding them costs you something. Your father did not teach you this. Not because he did not love you. Because nobody taught him. Because the world he handed you the map for was already becoming something else. Because the manual was written for a different era and nobody stopped to update it before passing it on. You are the update, not in some grand way, in the specific personal daily way of a person who decided that the incomplete map was not going to be the end of the story. Who decided that the gap between what they were handed and what they actually needed was going to be closed, methodically, with honesty and patience, and the willingness to be uncomfortable for as long as it takes. That decision does not have to be dramatic. It does not have to be announced. It does not need an audience. It just has to be real. And if you made it through this entire video, if you stayed with this conversation from the beginning all the way to here, something in you already knows that it is. Something in you recognized this. Not because I said anything you have never heard before in any form, because the truth, when it is actually the truth, does not feel like new information. It feels like something you already knew that you finally have language for. That recognition is the beginning. What you do tomorrow morning is what comes next. And if you want to keep having this conversation, if you want the next layer of what was missing from the manual, subscribe to this channel. Every video here is built the same way this one was. No filler, no generic advice. No content designed to make you feel temporarily good and permanently the same. Just the honest conversation that should have been happening years ago. Share this with one person who needs to hear it, not to grow the channel, because you already know who that person is. The one who is carrying the same gap you were carrying before this video. The one who is navigating with the same wrong map. They need this conversation as much as you did. And if this hit you somewhere real, drop a comment below. Not a performance. Just the honest thing. What landed. What you are going to do differently tomorrow. What you finally have language for that you have been feeling for a long time without being able to name it. That comment might be the most useful thing you do today. Not for me. For the next person who watches this and scrolls to the comments to find out whether any of this is real. Your honesty is the social proof that matters. Not the manufactured kind. The real kind.